Sunday, May 5, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minute news. Our guest today is a licensed mental health professional, a recognized expert on cults and undue influence. He possesses a unique perspective, having experienced life as a former cult member himself who was successfully deprogrammed in 1976. As a clinical professional, he's dedicated his life to aiding others in similar situations. He's the author of several books, including The Cult of Trump. Dr. Stephen Hassan, welcome to The Weekend Show.
Thank you, Anthony. I love your work. I love your show. And it's always a pleasure and an honor to talk with you.
You're too kind. Let's dive straight into the situation that America finds itself in right now, where Donald Trump is in criminal court, and we're, 7 months away from a general election, and he is the candidate for the Republican Party. Considering everything that the country has been through, and considering that he is, up in front of judges and juries for multiple crimes, some of the most serious crimes that America has ever heard of, overturning an election, stealing classified documents, just to name a couple. Are you surprised, as a mental health professional, that he is not just leading in the polls, but is even considered as the candidate as the next Republican president?
It's a really good question. On one level, I'm not surprised. And on another level, I'm very disappointed and surprised that the media still doesn't understand that we're in the 21st century and that we are subjected to psychological warfare operations through the internet and social media. And so I'm frustrated if we're going to look for an adjective more than anything else, but I'm still very hopeful. But it's going to take an effort for people to understand better what the mind control is that's being deployed, and how to protect yourself and your loved ones, and understand that we really want our freedom and our liberty and our democracy.
So you see the whole experience, I guess, as it's like a psychological operation where people have been on a huge scale, 70 million votes last time for that man, on a huge scale have been brainwashed into seeing him as a rebel and as a martyr, and as anti-establishment, all of these things he claims to be, which to those of us with critical thinking, it's kind of clear that he's actually the antithesis of that.
Exactly. But you mentioned in the intro that I was in a cult. I was in the Moonies, the same company that has the Washington Times and is the center of climate science denial for 50 years. And I was in the room with Sun Myung Moon when he said, we have to subvert the government, infiltrate it. We have to install a theocracy because democracy is satanic. I was literally sent with hundreds of Moonies to fast for Nixon during Watergate. And I was even in the room with Moon when he said, when we take power in America, we will amend the Constitution and make it a capital offense for people who don't follow our rules around the mass weddings and sexual abstinence. And I thought at the time, yes, Father! So for me, watching this over 48 years just fester and grow and get more and more powerful, I've been doing what I can to raise the alarms, to educate people about what's the difference between authoritarian mind control and controlling your own mind as an adult. But largely the media seems not willing to make the effort to educate people, but it seems about more, I guess, commercialization and inflaming emotions of fear and anger and disgust. And that's not going to help us have a country where we can live together and trust each other.
It does seem like capitalism has kind of dealt the country a bad hand here, because Trump is box office, and somebody like that from the media's perspective is very much seen as a meal ticket.
Yeah, but let me just clarify. I'm not against capitalism. I'm not a communist.
Nor am I, incidentally. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And what we do need is checks and balances, and we need to have regulations to protect the public good. And I want to call out some very dangerous ideologies that have been promulgated, especially by some billionaires that have enormous amount of influence and power. For example, Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged, and this notion that selfishness is good, greed is good, and altruism is evil. This incorrect notion of social Darwinism, whoever has more money or has higher status is a better person, which is ridiculous and nonsensical. But so many people have been programmed to think that to be an influencer is the highest thing you can do as a career, instead of being a good person and contributing to your friends, your family, your community, to the country, and to the global environment.
But is that a uniquely American story baked into the American dream, where success is measured by wealth?
Well, so in the cult of Trump, I went back to Edward Bernays' 1928 book, Propaganda, and Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. He was the first person to connect business and psychology and politics and psychology, did the first presidential campaign. And his insight, which Goebbels of Hitler's Nazi regime tried to hire him, but copied everything. His insight was, you don't sell people goods, you sell them the needs for goods. And the principal technique with marketing is make people feel deficient. Their body's not the right size, their color isn't good, your house smells, or whatever. So it's this horrible misuse of psychology. Instead of informing people to grow up and become adults and contributing members of society, to feel like you're never good enough. And if you just got that car or that watch, or you just got that award, then you'll be valuable. And that's not how it works with human beings. We're valuable because we're special and unique, and that we have integrity and honesty
and compassion,
kindness,
ultimately, right?
And compassion, exactly.
Yeah.
The golden rule: don't do to others what you don't want done to you.
Right.
Seriously.
And Donald Trump really kind of encapsulated what you've just said in that line in the speech, which I'll never forget. I think it was before he won the election. It was a big campaign speech, and he said, "The American dream is dead. I alone can fix it." So by trying to convince people that the country was a disaster when it wasn't, I mean that was Obama's America in 2015 and 2016, and the country was actually in one of the best places it's ever been. But for him, obviously as a white supremacist and somebody who had a completely different view of America, he tried to project this notion that the country needed fixing.
Yeah, so one thing I want your listeners to understand is that the way the mind works is we respond to words, and it elicits emotions and reactions and images in our mind. And so one of the way to hack people's minds is to be certain, to speak with such utter confidence and certainty. The average person goes, whoa, He must know what he's talking about because he's speaking with such certainty. Normal people understand nobody's perfect. Nobody has the truth with a capital T. We always can self-reflect and be better, have engage in other perspectives. But this is a hack of people's minds to have somebody so certain, especially when they have a position of perceived authority. And I'll
And
add,
wealth, I
and
guess.
well, or pseudo wealth.
Right.
Mark Burnett, who is part of Christian dominionism, selected Donald Trump and did The Apprentice and created this myth that he was a successful businessman when he was a utter failure. But the idea is to create an image, make people feel uncomfortable challenging it, recruit other influencers to create the top of the pyramid of the cult that keep repeating over and over and over. And then there are other tricks like projecting all of your shadow stuff, all your dark stuff on the other. So he did a coup on January 6th, but no, it was the Democrats who were doing the coup. Like everything gets
So blatant,
upside
though.
down.
It's so blatant. I mean, the upside down is a great way to describe it. That's a Stranger Things reference, I think. Living in the upside down, where you don't know which way is up. And I wrote down a few examples of how MAGA Republicans have projected this type of thing. And I just thought we could maybe look through them and talk about them, this kind of twilight zones. For example, there is this myth that Republicans are fiscally responsible and that Democrats waste money. But the ledger doesn't support that argument, the actual the paperwork. So for example, during Donald Trump's presidency, he signed into law about $8.4 trillion worth of stuff, and the gross national debt grew from 19 trillion to nearly 28 trillion. He added $7.8 trillion more to the national debt than the decades of debt that we saw. And yet somehow that seems to have been eradicated from the national conversation, or certainly from MAGA Republicans. They have no knowledge of it. It's the same with the Russia collusion thing. He denied any collusion with Russia and kept repeating the phrase "no collusion." And yet we saw him at a press conference in Helsinki, standing next to Vladimir Putin, and took his side over the side of the US intelligence service.
Exactly.
Regarding, interference in the election. It's like, it's completely the opposite of what's happening. And yet, despite the video evidence and despite the ledger, people can't get their heads around that. Why is that? Is it like a blindness to reality?
Well, for me as a mental health professional who's been helping people exit all types of authoritarian mind control relationships, organizations, countries, religious groups, I see it as a dissociative disorder, frankly. And to use my own experience, there was the real Steve Hassan, a conservative Jew from Flushing, Queens. I grew up 1.3 miles from Donald Trump, I might add, on the poor side of Union Turnpike, who liked poetry, who liked girls, and was going to be a creative writing professor one day. And then there was the Mooney Steve, who was modeled after Sun Myung Moon. I was told to walk like him, think like him, feel like him, act like him. And it was the pseudo identity. And that's my experience talking with people who've been radicalized by Trump or by any number of other cult groups that comprise the cult of Trump. But deep down inside, people know that there's something wrong. They experience doubts, but they get suppressed. They are trained with thought-stopping techniques. I mentioned Norman Vincent Peale. That's something that Trump was raised with, this notion that if you believe something 100%, it will magically manifest.
This is why he thought he could make COVID disappear just by closing
magically,
his eyes.
Magical thinking.
Yeah.
Just the law of attraction is not a law, and it's just a bogus belief. But if you believe it 100%, that the world's going to be better by following Trump, you disconnect from experts, science, and from institutions that have been created to help support all of humanity. And what I just mentioned, I learned from a former naval intelligence officer who did his political dissertation at Stanford on fourth generation psychological warfare, Anthony. And was first explicated in the 80s by a guy named William Lind, who met with Trump in the White House when he was there, who paired with the Christian right, Paul Weyrich. It's a way of disorienting, distrusting, creating uncertainty in order to program people to be ready to accept a fascist or an authoritarian.
It's so interesting because, some of us look at Trump and we're like, he's too dumb to be able to manipulate anybody or anything. And yet, from what you're describing, his childhood and young adulthood, he was exposed through the people that his parents kept company with. Roy Cohn, we know about that, the types of people who were influencing him throughout. And because he never lived in reality, he lived in a gilded mansion with a gold toilet, that he never really understood the everyman or the working poor, especially the people he claims to represent. I mean, my favorite moments are when he's on rallies and he says, when you go to the grocery store, you have to show ID to buy your groceries. And it shows a complete lack of understanding of reality and what normal life is like for everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. What I want to also share with your listeners is that there's a profile for cult leaders, destructive cult leaders. It's called malignant narcissism. It was that term was created by Erich Fromm, who was a survivor of the Holocaust. And I would just want to read off quickly, Anthony, the characteristics, because if you understand these are the characteristics of a malignant narcissist, you will protect yourself from 80 to 90% of every bad actor you'll ever meet in your life. So and I have a list of this on my freedomofmind.com website. Grandiose, self-centered behavior, fantasies
Check.
of power, success, or attractiveness,
Check.
Need for praise and admiration, sense of entitlement, lack of empathy, which is critical. You can't step into someone else's shoes. So that's narcissism. Now we get to the malignant part. They think they're above the law, so they engage in antisocial behavior. They're pathological liars. They're interpersonally exploitative. They're sadistic. They're harassing and silencing. They have a tendency for violence and paranoia and an inability to trust friends and subordinates. And when I was first asked to write The Cult of Trump, I declined. I was like, I'm a mental health professional. I don't want to get into politics. But I knew growing up in Queens that Trump was a malignant narcissist. I couldn't not see that. So that was the basis for me accepting the task to write the book. What I didn't understand is that there were actual authoritarian cults that were manipulating Trump and using Trump and who were bringing millions of their base to follow Trump. And so that's the book stands. It's totally validated 5 years later. People read it and are like, holy mackerel, Steve, you really nailed it. And I was like, yeah, I even said if he wasn't reelected in 2020, there'd be violence. And I quoted Jim Jones and his ordering an assassination of Representative Leo Ryan when he went down to Guyana. The thing about cults is they're very predictable, Anthony. And with the cult of Trump, he's telling us what he's going to do.
Right.
And so what I want to say is, I'm sure you have a large listenership who are already convinced that Trump's bad news and they're not going to vote for him. But what I want to really reach out to your audience and say, we can be doing better to reach out to the middle of America and to the believers who are still trapped in the mind control. And there are ex-members who are coming out and sharing their experiences. We need to do this way more to destigmatize it, because I can tell you, when I got out of the Moonies, I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. People were like, what was wrong with you? Are you a weak person, a stupid person, an uneducated person? It's like, no, I was an extra honor student from a stable family, loving family with clear values and goals.
But they exploited your vulnerabilities.
Yeah, my girlfriend dumped me, and 3 women flirted with me, lied to me. And that's another key thing. Outright lying, withholding vital information, or distorting information are the 3 weapons of information control that cults use to recruit. And cults don't say everything that's a lie. They have a lot of truthful kernels in there, especially if they can
clever, isn't it?
target you. And as a Moonie, and then we're going back to 74, I was told to think about people as thinkers, feelers, doers, or believers. And as I'm talking with them, this was way before you could buy people's data on the dark web. So now things are AI'd with psychological warfare. But back then, it was very much, you had to ask questions, find out what made the person tick, what motivated them, and then cater to that, but feed them incrementally. So I didn't know they thought Moon was the Messiah for months. People don't realize it wasn't like I had a lecture. Oh yeah, the Messiah is 10 times greater than Jesus, is in Korea, and he's a fat Korean billionaire. No, I never would have joined.
It's the mass scale of the brainwashing that I think people struggle with, right? So what was the maximum number of Moonies at any one time? How many people did they get to?
The Moonies started in Korea. Then they went to Japan and the United States. I was one of the first that was really recruited in the United States.
But it wasn't 70 million.
No, they had a few hundred Moonies before me. I'd say max in the US, it was maybe 30,000 total.
So this concept of it being scalable, like brainwashing being scalable to the point, because the argument that a lot of MAGA Republicans are saying, and I have a friend who is very much in the cult, who told me that Joe Biden is going to step down and Kamala Harris is going to become the president, and then Gavin Newsom's going to be the vice president, and they're going to pardon Biden for all of his crimes. And I was like, what crimes? Like, there are no charges against him. They tried to impeach him and they had to drop the impeachment because there was zero evidence. And still they are completely convinced that, this is a whole conspiracy and that they know. And they feel this sense of authority that, no, we know what's really going on. And, I don't say anything because I don't want to get into an altercation, but I recognize that it's going to take a whole lot more time than one conversation to deprogram them.
Yeah, no, it's more than one thing, but it's going to require learning how to listen, how to be curious, how to ask questions. But I just need to comment on what you just said, because as you were speaking, I was remembering Supreme Court Justices Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny,
yes,
who was texting Mark Meadows, and we know that Denver Riggleman was brought in by the January 6th committee to decrypt his phone, and she was talking about Biden being sent to Gitmo for all of his crimes. Right. So this is not new stuff, but the thing is, with active measures is the term the Russians use for psychological warfare. And they have tens of thousands of full-time soldiers on the internet using data, because we have no privacy data protection in the United States, and using very advanced algorithms to make people more extreme, either on the progressive left or on the right. and to turn people against each other and towards identity politics.
Right.
So
We're seeing this in universities at the moment, where with
exactly
people clashing over their support of Israel over the Palestinians. It smells to me like I'm like, this doesn't make sense.
this
Has happened in such a way. There seems to be a lack of critical thinking about how America can intervene or not. And actually this idea of people taking sides and actually being physical with each other has got to have come from somewhere. And this is the
absolutely.
type of psyop you're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. And let's not forget Marina Butina infiltrated the NRA, and there are
Yes.
19 million assault rifles in a very small number of people's possessions. And my former cult, Moon died, the big guy. The two sons are in Pennsylvania, and they call the mother, who paid, by the way, Trump $2.5 million to endorse the Moonies a few weeks after January 6th. But these two guys in Pennsylvania who claim the mother is satanic now, one has a gun cult called the Rod of Iron Ministries, and they have training compounds. And he says that God wants us to have an assault rifle. He claims the Rod of Iron in Revelation is an AR-15 that his brother happens to make in a factory.
That's
in
right. They manufacture,
Pennsylvania.
don't they? Yeah.
And they have two training compounds, one in Tennessee and one near Waco, Texas. And they're training using vets for civil war. And I keep saying, hey, I hope law enforcement is understanding they're recruiting Americans to not to follow Moon as the Messiah, even though this creepy kid of Sun Myung Moon, who I actually knew when I was in the cult, he was a little tot at the time. He claims he already has a new constitution they're going to put in place when they take over the United States of America.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
But that's what I'm trying to say. This is an old playbook, except it's been ramped up with 21st century technology.
Right.
And people need to understand cell phones and being on the internet. These are tools for us. We're not to be toys of the technology or the people controlling the technology.
So we're giving ourselves to them effectively by using social media, whether it be Facebook or any of these sites that are taking your data. Nobody goes into the settings and reads the privacy thing, which is hundreds of pages long. They just click accept and off they go. And, with that comes a kind of warfare, like a kind of cold warfare.
Exactly.
And we saw this in 2016 with the Kremlin interfering with the election, and that's where the phrase election interference was really coined for America. And it's ironic that Donald Trump is now using that same kind of phrase that we use to describe Russia to describe the court cases against him, and saying that it's Joe Biden trying to do election interference to prevent him from running.
When you're raised in an authoritarian cult where you don't know what's normal and healthy, where you're not encouraged to question, where you're corporally punished, you have a mindset. And this is what Vladimir Putin was raised in, not to mention when he went to the KGB. And all those Russian emigres in Israel, they're still listening to Putin propaganda. And they're a big part of Netanyahu's base, who I did put in the cult of Trump. And I quoted him saying Trump was like a King Cyrus, a sinner, but God was going to use him. Well, that's what the Christian right uses to claim, well, he's not perfect. Yeah, he's paid off a porn star so that he could, get elected. But wait a minute here. There's methodology here. And so for me, Anthony, my life work is to say, hello, this is real. We need to update the law, which is why I did my doctoral dissertation using trafficking law, fraud, force, or coercion. This is international law against slavery. Well, I'm saying if you use the bite model, it not only explains pimps and traffickers, it explains authoritarian regimes like China and Russia, and like New Apostolic Reformation and Christian Dominionism and Nazi groups and Ku Klux Klan, all of these groups. And so, for me, I was listening to your fantastic interview with Barbara McQuaid, and she was talking about if you can name it, you can claim it. If you understand the techniques, they lose their power over you. You go, oh, that's projection. Oh, that's just repetition of a lie. Oh, that's another element of malignant narcissism. It doesn't affect us personally because we can see it clearly
and there is a light bulb moment, I think, because anybody who has, you can go through life and never meet a malignant narcissist, or you can have one or two in your own family. And, this is the thing. If you have experienced it, maybe a boss at work or a member of your own family, in my experience, once you identify that the illness is malignant narcissism and you check off all the boxes, as we did with your explanation for Donald Trump, you can almost breathe a sigh of relief and be like, that's what it is. And it is, there is a great sense of comfort in having knowledge and educating yourself in what's happening, because otherwise you're just,
psychoeducation. I say we're needing to declare a public health emergency,
right,
like we did with COVID, which was a real virus. This is a mind virus. We need to develop inoculation programs. We need to train clinicians, media, politicians, educators, and we need to have facilities to help people who are coming out to become.
But tragically, this will never happen, though, will it? Because that is acknowledging the elephant in the room, and that is that there is this Trump contagion, as Dr. Bandy Lee calls it, which is a pox upon society. And nobody really, especially in the media and in politics, wants to acknowledge that Donald Trump has mental illness. Obviously there's a lot of talk about him having dementia or being senile or aging or whatever it might be. But the actual stuff that we're talking about today, barely any mention.
Right, but I'm questioning corporate media and who's making the decisions, and are they paid off, or are they ideologically aligned, or are they just being blackmailed, which is another, American compromise and such. But I have to remain hopeful because there's no alternative to empower people to rise up, have hope, trust each other that we can outvote, have a supermajority, and maybe expand the Supreme Court, and vote Roe v. Wade into law, and do other things that the extremes do not want to see happen.
There's a lot to do, maybe getting rid of the filibuster and things that are preventing the country from progressing to a point where it can actually have more than just those basic checks and balances, which for my money don't seem to work. Listen, we have to take a quick break, but sure. I want to come back and talk about this Time magazine article that was based on 2 Donald Trump interviews, which is utterly terrifying and has very much kind of set the internet on fire. That's next here on The Weekend Show. Sick of the one-size-fits-all method, especially when it comes to your erectile dysfunction treatment? Well, good news. Now you've got options with Hims. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to doctor-trusted ED treatment options such as chewable hard mints, brand-name treatments like Viagra, or generic alternatives for up to 95% off. The process is simple and 100% online, no uncomfortable doctor's visits. Just answer a series of simple questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free. No insurance is needed. If ED is getting you down, it's time to join the hundreds of thousands of trusted Hims subscribers and get treated. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/weekend. That's HIMS.com/weekend for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/weekend. Hard mints are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Prices vary based on product and subscription plan. I'm excited to tell you about Moink. That's Moo plus Oink. Moink is a meat subscription box company on a mission to fight for the family farm. They're located in rural America, run by an 8th-generation female farmer. Their animals are raised humanely, their employees are paid a living wage, and the quality of their product is better than anything you'll find in a store. Moink delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken, and sustainable wild-caught Alaskan salmon straight to your door. I've received one of these boxes and I can verify that the quality of the food was excellent and it tasted delicious too. Keep American farming going by signing up at moinkbox.com/weekend now, and listeners of this show get free bacon for a year. That's 1 year of the best bacon you'll ever taste, but for a limited time. Spelled MOINK box.com/weekend. That's moinkbox.com/weekend. We're back with Dr. Stephen Hassan here on The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. Eric Cortellisa in the Time magazine created or based on 2 interviews, created an article which has been a really fascinating read. It's long. It's take you about half an hour to read it. But what emerged in these 2 interviews with Donald Trump, considering he's not really giving interviews to anybody other than far right and right wing news channels, and conversations with more than a dozen of his closest advisors and confidants, were the outlines of what the magazine calls an imperial presidency that would reshape America and its role in the world. And they talk about allies laying the groundwork to restructure the presidency in line with a doctrine called the unitary executive theory, which holds that many of the constraints imposed on the White House by legislators and the courts should be swept away in favor of a more powerful commander-in-chief. What they're describing is authoritarianism. What they're describing is the foundations of a dictatorship. And, I said just before the break that the checks and balances, I don't really see how they have worked in this case, because the January 6th uprising, the coup, the riot, it all was allowed to happen. And Donald Trump did nothing. In fact, he actually relished this process. He enjoyed seeing people attacking the U.S. Capitol in his name. So with this article in mind, which the thing I got from it the most, Stephen, is the fact that he feels such a sense that last time he didn't get to do what he really wanted to do because there were reputable people holding him back, the military and chiefs of staff and various people. But this time he's learned his lesson. This time he will only employ people who have his own authoritarian kind of directives in mind, and there will be no one to stop him. How do we process that as civil citizens of this country?
Well, the main point I want to make is he's predicting what he's going to do. So then the question is, for everybody else in America and around the world, are we going to just go, how can he do this? Or
Yes.
trying to make him normalized and equivocate Biden and Biden's values and his agenda and Trump's? The media needs to step up. And I really wonder who's pulling the strings of corporate media, because they're not going to like it if there's a cult leader, authoritarian dictator in the shadow of Vladimir Putin running the show in America. Will be disastrous. And I want to raise the call for all former members who've experienced the malignant narcissist, their family, their friends, educators, mental health professionals. And we need to have a plan, not just a plan between now and November, but a 10-year plan for how we're going to have a positive vision of the United States where we live up aspirationally to our goals and values. And I don't think most Americans, unless they've done a lot of world travel, I have, they don't understand how many people are looking at us going, we need America. And what are you people doing over there? Like,
Yes.
how can you allow this to happen?
Well, NATO is panicking right now, and they're having to ask NATO member countries to actually restock their military supplies, and they're moving bases around, they're moving equipment around, they are preparing for Trump's America with which would effectively withdraw from NATO, which is Vladimir Putin's want, but also economically as well. America sneezes, the world catches a cold.
Yeah. So I'm going to add one more dimension that Ian Bremmer helped me understand, and that is that we now live in a world where there are global corporations who have this ability to influence 1 billion people, 2 billion people. And they don't want regulations. They want to make profit. They want to have things their way. And they're not putting themselves in the shoes of the common person looking after things. And I want to cite Jonathan Haidt, the social psychologist, has a brand new book out called The Anxiety Generation. There's overwhelming data now internationally that young people are experiencing record levels of depression, anxiety, suicidality, eating disorders, sexual dysfunction, gender dysmorphia because of the internet and because of social media activities. But the social media giants, they're like, yeah, we need regulations. If they don't want it, I think Facebook has 15 or 1,800 full-time lobbyists in Washington who make their money by whining and dining and influencing politicians. So I think we start to need to think bigger about planetary survival and think about our children and our great-grandchildren and our great-great-grandchildren. That's how it used to be. People made sacrifices to make their children's lives better. Like, this was part of the human experience.
Yes.
And it's not selfishness is good, greed is good, altruism is evil. It's not believe it and it will magically come into reality, or these are the last days, so it doesn't matter what ecological destruction is done because God's going to magically remake the earth. These are all magical thinking kinds of things. I mean, I'm a believer in God, but I'm believing a God of love and of truth and honesty, and be kind to strangers, like the Abrahamic, traditions. Keep your flaps of your tent open, so if somebody's thirsty or needs shade, they can come and be your guest. Like, let's cultivate that mentality. We can do it.
What's frightening to me, though, is that the things that Donald Trump outlines in this Time interview, for example, to carry out a deportation operation designed to remove more than 11 million people from the country, and building migrant detention camps and deploying the US military at the border and inland, and letting states monitor women's pregnancies and prosecuting people who violate abortion bans. MAGA Republicans, for each one of those items on that horrific list, have been like, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's almost like the brainwashing is so acute now that things that the rest of the world see as barbaric, lacking any sense of compassion or humanity, have become the MO of Trump and Trump supporters. It's not like this guy is saying this stuff and everyone's like, oh my God, have you heard what he wants to deport 11 million people? They love it. And the more abusive he is, the more aggressive he is, the more he takes on judges and violates his gag orders. Love it. Just talk to that for a moment if you can.
That was my mindset as a Moonie. I really get it. I thought it was a great idea for us to kill everybody who didn't follow what we told them to do. And that was not how I was raised at all. But what I want to say is that if my family had been coached by Steve Hassan of the future, they could have gone to meetings, asked me questions, read the material, gone over it with me, and I would have gotten out. Yes. I would not have gone into that deep rabbit hole. But people get frustrated. They try to argue with facts and persuade you out, and they get angry, and it just feels like you're being persecuted. So it drives you deeper into the rabbit hole. And so again, and I want to say this other thing, what helped me get deprogrammed after my near fatal van crash that happened in 1976 from sleep exhaustion was I was so programmed to believe Moon was God's agent on Earth and that Satan was the God of this Earth and that there would be World War III. And so when the deprogrammers, who were ex-Moonies, said, are you interested in learning about Chinese communist brainwashing models? I was all in. Yes, I would like to know what Satan does. And they shared with me Robert J. Lifton's 1961 book, Chapter 22, his 8 criteria to know whether you've been brainwashed or not. And we went over all 8. And the Moonies did all 8. And all I felt at the end of that was, that's odd, because we're God and they're Satan. I wasn't quite open yet. I didn't have my moment of realization. That happened the next day when I wasn't told, Moon's a liar, Steve. No, they handed me one of Moon's speeches printed by the group. I knew the speech. They handed it to me. They said, just read this and tell us what you think. And for the first time in 2.5 years, I'm listening, I'm reading the words, and I had over 100 meetings with Moon in person. So I was not just a regular rank and file member. I'm reading him talking to congressmen and senators about how much respect he has for Americans and how surprised he is that any American could imagine a Korean brainwashing American youth. How ridiculous. His answer is no. Your answer is no. And I had the first critical thought. I said, what a liar. And as soon as because I had heard Moon talk about how stupid Americans were and how we needed to be brainwashed and how the Koreans were the master race. But as soon as I thought, what a liar, then I was like, if he's a liar, he's not a man of God. Because we teach that God is a God of truth. If he's a liar, that means he's not trustworthy. What have I been doing for the last
right.
2? And I cried for 3 hours, Anthony, because the real me had been experiencing all of these abuse, and I just was trained to do thought stopping. I had phobias put in my mind.
You were suppressing the real you in order to facilitate their methodology and their programming.
Exactly. But the key thing is, if people had understood what I've learned just through trial and error over 48 years, is with rapport and trust, you ask people to go back before they got recruited and indoctrinated. Tell me about yourself. What were your goals? Right. Oh, you wrote poetry. Who was your favorite poet? Let's read that poem again. to re-anchor into your real self, and then
The identity, the authentic identity.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then walk me through what you first thought when those women approached you at the cafeteria in Queens College. I was like, well, my girlfriend just dumped me. I said, these women were cute. They were flirting with me. Maybe I'll get lucky. They lied to me saying they were students. They weren't. They said they weren't part of any group. They were. But just to remember that the beginning was a deception. I tell everybody, look, if something is legitimate, it stands up to scrutiny. You should feel very comfortable asking direct questions,
yes,
and going to other sources to challenge whether or not they're being honest.
Can I ask you, because last week, we saw a moment maybe of this. So the Speaker of the House currently, Mike Johnson, a far-right Christian nationalist insurrectionist who is not popular with either side, it seems, suddenly had a change of heart about the funding for Ukraine, and also there was additional funding attached as well, including for Israel. And he went into a skiff. I think this was kind of what happened behind the scenes. He basically got taken into one of these secure environments where he was shown, whether it was video footage, I don't know, or he was given the facts by the intelligence services about what was going on in Ukraine and the decimation of much of Ukraine, and how Ukraine was very much really about to lose this war by nature of the fact that, the funding had been cut for so many months now. And he almost came out a different person. Like, he was deprogrammed through the visual materials that he was exposed to, and the honesty by, I presume, the military and senior generals. That has obviously changed the whole direction of politics just in that one kind of skiff meeting. And now Marjorie Taylor Greene and her friends are trying to get rid of him and oust him, claiming that he's, become a Democrat. I mean, is it the case, do you think, with somebody like him who is, devoted to the Bible? He's said quite openly, if you want to know my views, just read the Bible. He's also vehemently anti-gay and has some very extreme views on abortion and
yep.
But do you think that in that moment last week, maybe he had I was going to say a come to Jesus moment, but it's actually not that at all, is it?
Well, I think I heard him describe that he wanted to be on the right side of history. And with people who enter politics, usually they have a pretty healthy ego, and they like to be special and to have extra power and such. But I also seem to remember his son is entering the military. And I can't help but wonder if that wasn't a part of his calculation. But in the end, I really do believe fundamentally people are good people.
Yeah, me too.
And I want to just come back for one more second, if I may, as a mental health professional. People are not born cult leaders. The latest understanding is it's a lack of secure attachment in the first few years of infancy that causes an infant to not have a healthy sense of self, to feel like they're special and they're truly loved and taken care of. And so they grow up to adulthood compensating for that lack of love, that hole in their soul. And the thing is when you're around someone like a Donald Trump, you know that you can't trust him. He'll turn on you in a moment. He'll lie about you. He'll be your best friend one moment and your enemy the next moment. And people in the MAGA cult world know, because people have left it, that everyone turns on you. Just like if you leave the Moonies or Scientology or any number of other destructive cults, it's a formula. These are not really your friends, because your alliance is to the group and to the leader and to the ideology, not to your conscience.
Is that why that it seems that it's not just the supporters that are in the cult of Trump, but it's also the Republican leadership that are in the cult of Trump? and that we should see people like the Freedom Caucus members, in fact, most of them, because let's be honest, most Republicans in Congress and in the Senate have never stood up to Donald Trump. A few of them are leaving and not seeking re-election, which is a pretty cowardly way to step away from the story. But ultimately, the cult goes way beyond just the MAGA hat, merchandise wearing fans, and actually is embedded in the leadership now. This is what Trump has been able to do, and also in the judiciary, in the Supreme Court, where he has also brainwashed. I mean, if you read what Samuel Alito was saying, about immunity, I mean, this is a terrifying place for America to find itself in.
So I want to add a point that I think the public needs to understand. Charles Koch of the Koch corporate empire, the second largest private corporation in the United States, father was a John Bircher, has been setting up think tanks for decades. He's funding, that's my understanding, the free speech movement on college campuses. This libertarian corporate cult. I actually interviewed Anthony, a man who wrote Kochland, a book about the Koch corporate empire. And I read the book and I'm like, oh, you're describing a business cult, a corporate cult here. And even in the book, he talks about one of the employees who did an analysis decades ago saying, we don't need to keep going with fossil fuels. We really could pivot and be very healthy as a corporation. And he was kicked out because they believe that you should not have government regulation. It should be libertarian, freestyle. Let's have power, money, and control of everything. And we need to identify these ideologies that are counter to our survival. And I'll just quickly make the analogy that cancer cells are selfish cells. They will kill the host body if they're allowed to proliferate. And that's what I believe is a metaphor of what's happening on the planet today. And we have to step back and go, no, we want a healthy planet. We want survival.
Yes.
And we need to think backwards to where do we go from here, step by step in a methodical, planned way, and create the structures and get the funding necessary. And a lot of the funding for the right is not coming from government. It's coming from private industry. And if anyone's listening who has means, there's a path out of this mess. But in a sense, I'm going to now make a plug for my work. It's like we need to deprogram all of the authoritarians around the world, including
so the malignant
Chinese.
Narcissism is not just in political leaders, it's in business leaders. It's in lobbyists. It's this notion of because now we're at a point where a lot of these supporters are seriously saying that a dictatorship would be better for America and that democracy has failed. And so it's almost like we've got to the precipice. We're literally teetering on the end now to get to a point where people publicly are open about a dictatorship being a better option for America under Donald Trump and being more aligned with Russia and China, North Korea and Hungary than the traditional America and then the freedom that we enjoy here.
Right.
I mean, that is a mental illness of extreme proportion.
Exactly. And people have to get out of their sleep, for lack of a better word.
Yes.
Like, it can't happen because it's too terrible. It's like it happened in Germany. People thought Hitler was a joke. They voted him in. And that's what we're looking at. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm just stating I was there. I was in this mindset. I've been watching for 48 years the world getting radicalized as I was radicalized as a young person. But it's great to be free. It's great to think for myself. It's great to read books with different opinions. and interact with people with many different religious and ethical and philosophical orientations, and encourage science and data, and not just wishful thinking. And if you believe it, it will be true. No, that's not how reality is.
Okay, I have to take another quick break, but I want to come back and finish this conversation with Dr. Stephen Hassan next. Have you ever wished that you had a whiter and brighter smile? Well, before you visit a dentist, you should know that their whitening treatments can be very expensive, and it's not just the price. You also have to book the appointment and schedule time away from work and family to sit in a dentist's office chair while undergoing the procedure. It's a hassle. Fortunately, now you can try Smile Actives at home or anywhere, anytime. Smile Actives offers a safe and affordable alternative to those expensive whitening procedures. I myself had a whitening procedure in the dentist chair several years ago. It was kind of painful, I didn't really enjoy it, and it didn't seem to last. Well, 97% of Smile Actives users in a clinical trial reported up to 6 shades whiter on average, all within 30 days. Simply add Smile Actives Pro Whitening Gel to your regular toothpaste. It's been formulated with polyclean technology to boost stain removal and deliver active whitening ingredients into teeth's grooves and crannies to get better whitening. Smile Actives makes a teeth whitening gel that can simply be added to your toothpaste every time you brush your teeth. So no change in your routine, no extra time, and no more messy strips or trays or lights. People will start commenting on your whiter, brighter smile in just days. Smile Actives is the whitening boost your favorite toothpaste needs to give you the smile you deserve. Visit smileactives.com/weekend today to receive a special buy one, get one free offer with auto delivery plus free shipping and handling. That's smileactives.com/weekend. Terms and conditions apply. See site for details. It's the Weekend Show. We're back with Dr. Stephen Hassan. I'm Anthony Davis. We've been talking a little bit about the twilight zone, the upside down, where where reality, I would refer to it maybe as a post-truth world. And that's a phrase that, there's been lots of phrases, especially since Kellyanne Conway coined the alternative facts phrase. And I was like, uh-oh, like the world has suddenly changed. I was thinking about examples of this, like, for example, with Republicans voting no to spend a single penny on foreign aid, claiming that we should put the US first. And then at the same time, they vote against any and every spending package for domestic issues, nothing for childcare or education or pregnant mothers or for infrastructure. And then when they do get a new bridge in their state, they're like, yay, that's my bridge. It's like, you voted against that. So there's a lot of contradiction that I don't think people really address. And finally, and this is the one I thought we could maybe end on, is this notion of Republicans claiming to be American-loving patriots who celebrate freedom and yet are voting to ban everything from books to abortion. Let's talk about that. It's almost it's projection, isn't it? There is this notion of, do people really understand this idea that Donald Trump is projecting, and people tend to be on receive, and so their perspective changes, the kind of post-truth perspective?
So you mentioned, your question demands that I explain something in social psychology called the fundamental attribution error. And what social psychology says is that when humans try to understand other humans, they have an unconscious bias to overestimate disposition or personality and underestimate social influence. So people are walking around thinking they're unmalleable and nobody could brainwash them because I'm thinking for myself. Instead of understanding social psychology and understanding we're socialized beings from infancy onward, I want to do a plug to a mentor, Dr. Philip Zimbardo of the famous Zimbardo prison experiment. In his later years, he created a nonprofit called the Heroic Imagination Project, and it's heroicimagination.org. And he created these little videos of social psychology principles with a curriculum that teachers or parents can review with people. Everyone needs to understand things like the bystander effect. What is the bystander effect? It's if you're walking by yourself down the street and somebody keels over, you're almost always going to go and look after them or call for 911 or something. If there are 30 people walking and ignoring him, the likelihood that you're going to call 911 is very low unless you understand the bystander effect. And the bystander effect says you always make choices based on if it was me keeling over, would I want someone to come help me? And if the answer is yes, then you go help them. But we need to get educated about how the mind works, and that because everybody in your sphere is repeating over and over again the same black and white, us versus them, good versus evil narrative, doesn't mean that we have to agree with it. And in fact, it's be good to be contrarian and ask questions, because again, if something's legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny.
The elephant in the room, though, for all of this stuff, because, I love listening to academics and people who've done the work and done the research, and it's, but in Trump's world, academics have no value and experts have been ignored. I mean, just ask Dr. Anthony
Fauci. That's the fourth generation warfare.
Right. And so what we're asking of people, considering that Trump has very much reached these, what are called in America, low information voters. It's not a phrase I like particularly, but it's a reality that people are not well read on these subjects. They're working, they're busy, they don't have the time. They only really take interest in the election in maybe the last few weeks of the campaign. But the true elephant in the room is that America famously has poor education. There is large swathes of the country who are uneducated, who are not critical thinkers, who are easily influenced when it comes to, these types of, I don't know, people share memes. I mean, that's how a lot of this information is spread these days.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like we need to not just re-educate people on this subject, but people need a broader education about how the world works, let alone how America works. Because for me, having relocated 5,500 miles and grew up in Europe and seen different nations, and I grew up in the UK, but I worked in Norway, and I was always in Paris and France and Spain and Italy, and seeing different systems of government, taking an interest. I mean, Sweden, I find fascinating at the moment. These systems are so different, these social democracies, so different to what we have here in the United States. And Trump's rhetoric is that's all communism, that's all fascism, that's all Marxism. And these words have no value anymore. People don't even remember the origins of these. And then, of course, you have countries like China who have branded themselves as the communist peoples, and it's like that's not communism of old. That's a different form of communism that they've rebranded to give the impression that people have a say. There's so many different aspects, and all of them require people to have done a little reading. So how does America survive with this kind of low information issue that no one wants to really talk about?
Well, you were just talking about perspective, because the cure to blind faith is perspective. It's stepping out of your current ideology and looking at it and thinking back, who was I before I adopted these things? And that's another reason why we really need to learn from history.
Yes.
I don't know if you read Prequel, Rachel Maddow's book, but the Nazis were using a Catholic radio preacher who had millions of followers to keep the U.S. out of World War II. They had plans for a physical coup in 1940. So this is an old playbook of how Americans can be co-opted to stay out of Europe. That's none of their business. We should be America first. This is an old playbook by
Yes.
who we so many people sacrificed to destroy Hitler's regime and the authoritarian regime. We need to think back to our history and realize freedom is worth fighting for. I'm fighting every day, Anthony, because I was there and my family loved me and they intervened. And it's doable. And I'm telling you, there are a lot of people walking around who say that they're following Trump and they have a lot of doubts, but they can't say anything to their peer groups because they don't want to be attacked. But if
this is the bystander syndrome. This is the
yeah,
same.
but the truth is we could have a messaging campaign that would actually be effective.
So who's we? Who should do that? Should it be the media? Should it be the Democrats? Should it be a conglomerate of mental health professionals? Whose job is that?
Well, I've been avoiding appealing to the Democrats to hire me because I want to be an NGO who's for human rights, who's for mental health. And I've been speaking out, defending some things that the right has claimed because it's the right what I believe is the right thing to do, instead of just self-censoring and just playing to people who already accept and believe what I'm saying, that Trump's a danger. I think we need to have a radical think tank planned out strategy. And as I said, more than just between now and November, it needs to be a 10-year project or a 20-year project. The right wing has been doing this for 50 years.
Yes.
50. Yes.
Well, since Roe, effectively, that was a catalyst, wasn't it?
Well, I need to say this. So I interviewed the son of one of the most famous theologians, and Protestants were not against abortion until his name is Frank Schaeffer Jr. His father got convinced by him, because he got his girlfriend pregnant, to be against abortion. It was only the Catholics who were against abortion. But then Billy Graham and Pat Robertson, we can use this politically. We can convince people we're killing babies. And so, but people need to understand this was not something that was the norm.
Yeah.
This was a device to find a very powerful emotional lever to divide.
And ironically, Joe Biden is the Catholic in this particular race, and he is the one who is a proponent of women's rights.
So, and let me just say that in the cult of Trump, I talk about Opus Dei, who thinks the Pope is satanic, and who William Barr was on their executive board in Washington, D.C., and said, the Mueller report didn't show any Russian influence, even though
he's now endorsed Donald Trump for president.
And now he's circled around. Yeah, but Opus Dei is not, it's a right-wing secret cult. There are former members suing them for trafficking. I have blogs on this group. So let's go back to the Abrahamic religions. Let's go back to love and truth, and don't do to others what you don't want done to yourself. And care for the stranger. And in your list before of policies, we had a great immigration border policy, and the Republicans voted it down.
Yes.
Because it would have helped Biden.
Yes.
So they chose party over
that
policy.
Is proof. The fact that there was a bipartisan deal, and the Democrats had given way on so many of those issues in order to get this passed, to get the funding. And the fact that Donald Trump shot it down, it should have been a wake-up call to a lot of Trump supporters that Trump was on the wrong side of history. And I'm hoping, we don't know, there's no data for that.
I think we still need to have these talking points. But lastly, as we're wrapping up, stop trying to argue with true believers of a cult or in believers in Trump. Stop trying to use facts and reconnect a warm relationship, and be prepared to say, change my mind. Convince me. Show me what what convinced you, and
Yeah.
let's discuss it back and forth together.
So finally, the word that is often used in the US is polarization to talk about the kind of differences between the left and the right. How do we convince people that when you and I are advocating for democracy, that it's not because we are Democrats, it's because we care about the country, whether it's under a Republican or a Democrat leadership, and that the country is more important, and that in this moment, the safety and the security of America and the rest of the world hinges on Donald Trump not being reelected as president. How do we convince people that that is not a partisan point of view?
So again, I'm going to go back to my approach. I wrote a whole book on it called Freedom of Mind. It's not about persuasion. It's about asking questions. So for example, you could say to your friend, you know that I think you're intelligent. I respect you. If you do, don't say it if you
Where I'm
don't.
from, we call this a shit sandwich.
No, but don't. But I'm not talking about BSing. I mean,
Yeah,
if you don't know the person, if they're not a relative or whatever, you
yeah,
have to spend the time to get to know them and find common ground.
yeah.
But you say, I'm really interested in your point of view, and I'm really curious what I could possibly say that might enable you to consider a different point of view on things. And then you shut up and you wait
Yes.
because
Go
it
quiet.
takes time to think.
It's a sales technique, isn't it? Just stumm.
But well, there's a lot of social psychology has been adopted by salespeople. It's not all unethical. I have an influence continuum with values on the ethical side, etc. You're not ever going to lie to people. You're not going to use phobias on them, etc. But the point is that hey, we're human beings, and I'm really interested in you. I really want to understand how you came to adopt the beliefs you did and what, if anything, might open the doors for you to reconsider and be prepared for them to turn it around and ask you. And I say, I'm willing to be convinced.
Yeah.
Show me the evidence that COVID isn't a real virus that kills millions of people. I would really be interested. Oh, just do the research and then they give you 400 links. No. Pick one that was important to you. And then let's make a time and let's go through it together, point by point. And if you're willing to invest that time and effort, the person is going to be having dissonance over, I can't just dismiss Anthony or Steve. Can I come up with something or not? Or did I just accept the authority figures in that propaganda video or whatever and their claims?
It's so interesting. And it's a minefield, but I think the message that I get from you is that there's no replacement for doing the work. The reading, the taking time to make this a really important part of your day, as opposed to, oh, that's that thing that someone else is going to sort out, because we are all responsible in this moment
Yeah,
for
and
what
responsible
happens.
to our children and to
Yes.
our family members.
Yes.
And I say to every parent, you need to learn this stuff to protect your children. They're on the internet.
Yes.
What are you going to do after they get recruited into QAnon or some other bogus mind control hypnosis thing? Then you're going to call me up and say, what do I do?
Yeah.
No, have the conversation now. Watch the Social Dilemma documentary. Learn about how people who are experts, who are in the room, who understand, like BJ Fogg at the Stanford Persuasive Lab.
Yes.
He taught people how to do a dopamine addiction thing with the like button and the dings. Understand that we're human beings and we can be manipulated, and let's take control for me and have it in my body. And that's coming back to the dissociative disorder that I mentioned before. If you're dissociated, you're not in your body. Like you have to come back to your body and go, how does this feel? How do I feel reading Moon lying? He's lying. I heard him 100 times say the opposite. Alarm bells.
This is why the Trump contagion has spread, is because of the dopamine associated with it. It makes people feel temporarily high and feel good and feel part of something. And actually, when you deconstruct the policies and the rhetoric and the propaganda, that there is nothing there. And Trump is really, I mean, as we're beginning to discover, only really wants to be president to save himself. And this is not about making America great again. This is simply about keeping him out of prison, even if it means burning down the whole country.
Yeah, I would also add phobia indoctrination is the universal mind control technique. Anthony, I know we're wrapping up, but I was taken to see the Exorcist movie when it came out, and Moon gave a lecture after we came from the theater saying God made the Exorcist. This movie is a prophecy of what will happen if you leave the Unification Church. And I didn't believe in Satan or demons before that movie, and he said that. But then I was afraid of my own thoughts. I thought any doubt was a demon trying to invade me.
Wow.
So I did thought stopping. But phobias are the fastest mental illness to cure if you understand that the difference between a legitimate fear where there's actual danger and an irrational fear that was hypnotically implanted.
Okay. We have to finish, but Dr. Stephen Hassan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. You can also catch me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and join me next week with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.